Hello, the cycle of lectures will be based mainly on this literature. The 6-volume Fundamentals of Sociology and its continuation, Economics of Innovative Development. In general, these instances are for demonstrational purposes. Therefore, if someone needs it, everything is on the internet, you can download it. But those who need paper copies, then the publishing house Conceptual, on its website, everything is there, and not only that. We live, our senses have certain limitations on the range of perception of information, and much of what remains outside our perception, or what we don't pay attention to, even when it is within our perception, it exerts an impact on our life. So it was in the past, so it will be in the future. When it exerts an impact on our life, we sometimes think about where it comes from. No trouble seemed to be on the horizon, and here you go, get it. They are in abundance. The pictures will be devoted to this very question, where and how troubles come from. Well, we are accustomed to the fact that Britain is our ally in 2 world wars, that Britain took part in the intervention against the Soviet Union, and during the time of the war there was such an anecdote that Churchill came to the front and asked, "And if Hitler had gotten you alive, what would you have done?" And the soldier replies to him, "And I would have heated a poker on one end, and the cold end I would have inserted into Hitler's backside." Churchill asks, why the cold end? And so that you, Mr. Churchill, would not pull it out. That is, not everything is so simple in our relations with Great Britain. But if you look at this map of the world, then those countries with which Britain managed to make war, or invading their territory or attempting such invasions, they are highlighted in pink. Moreover, if you look at what is there in Africa, then Britain did not manage to fight with some countries because France managed to earlier. This is the historical political reality of a global scale. Picture taken in the early 20th century, Australia, Aboriginals. That is, the appearance of Western civilizers on a foreign land is always accompanied by something like this. These are the British in Australia, and this is Belgian Congo. At the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, rubber was only natural. There was no synthetic. And in the Belgian Congo, there were rubber plantations. There were norms of output, and if a person did not cope with the norms of output, then it was in the order of things to cut off the hands and feet of his loved ones. Well, Belgium is now the capital of NATO and the European Union. You can introduce such a concept as the psychodynamics of society. The psychodynamics of society is the result that is obtained when everyone does what they want, doesn't do what they don't want, and it turns out to be as it turns out to be. So psychodynamics carries a certain purpose aspiration, algorithmics for achieving objectives. Therefore, if it was in 1905, both the one and the other, and no one there sprinkled ashes on their heads, on the theme of repentance, then there is no reason to assume that this aggressive, enslaving essence of the West has gone anywhere. This is also on the same theme. Senator Harry Truman, 1941, the Great Patriotic War began. If we see that Germany is winning, we ought to help Russia. And if we see that Russia is winning, we ought to help Germany, and that way let them kill as many as possible. That is, there are no questions before the United States as to what ideals one and the other country is fighting for. But I want to draw your attention to the fact that when the song The Holy War is being performed in Russia now, one verse disappears from it in a whimsical way, like two different poles opposed in everything we fight. We strive for happiness and peace, they for the kingdom of the night. And this is also not just without reason. This is an attempt at one of the directions of activity that should lead people to the idea that there is no fundamental difference between Stalinism and Hitlerism, and, accordingly, the Second World War is something like a game of chess. Politicians decided that life was boring, let's have a war. Well, and the fact that there are peoples there, like chess pieces, and there will be victims, well, it is not of great importance. The soul is immortal. People will give birth to more. That is, the approach was such. Above is the United States battleship Maine. In general, for her time, the ship was maybe not a masterpiece, but nevertheless, it was a ship of the United States. Maine came to Havana, ostensibly for a courtesy call, and there it somehow exploded. Mostly rank and file were killed, black people. White people who were officers mostly survived, since at that time they were on leave on the shore. The States accused Spain of attacking their warship. This is what was left of Maine after the explosion. This false accusation was the reason for the start of the Spanish-American War, as a result of which some of the colonies of Spain went to the United States, in particular the Philippines, Hawaii. Well, Cuba allegedly received independence, and it remained in this pseudo-independent status until 1959, when Fidel Castro with his comrades established the real sovereignty of Cuba. But the United States has never apologized for what has been done. Although, after Maine was lifted, no one had any doubts that she perished as a result of an internal explosion, and the Spaniards had nothing to do with this internal explosion. Well, now again there are publications on the theme that there was no incident in the Gulf of Tonkin, and the United States, under the pretext that this incident allegedly took place, themselves attacked Vietnam, proceeding from their foreign policy interests. But such things as the fact that in the history of Japan's attack on the United States in 1941, there were also many mysterious episodes, because the Central Command did almost everything so that the Japanese could easily strike Pearl Harbor. But at the same time, at Pearl Harbor, not a single new ship was damaged, since they were either withdrawn from Pearl Harbor in advance or were in other theaters altogether. And what was destroyed in Pearl Harbor were obsolete ships built in the years of the First World War, which were supposed to have been scrapped in the very near future. So, what the United States is doing, this is a separate theme. This is Julian Assange's father. So he insists that after 1945, the United States destroyed 73 states and is responsible for the death of at least 26 million. Moreover, if we talk about who is included in the list of these 73 states, then the Soviet Union is also included. Because the collapse of the Soviet Union, yes, of course, there were internal reasons, but there was also external stimulation of this collapse and governance towards it from the outside. Well, now about the essence of war, how the majority of people understand it. These are the Japanese in China. They threw a baby into the air, let him fall onto bayonets. This is the Germans in our country. But if you pay attention, the child is near the body of the hanged mother. Well, the Germans are happy. The geese are there. This is from the American military archives. In general, a certain concentration camp. The platform is loaded with corpses. The interesting thing is that people are looking over the fence, and for them, this is commonplace. An example of German propaganda in the occupied territories. That is, an orientation on the theme that the population of the occupied territories should not only be loyal to the occupying power, but also cooperate with them. This is also in our country, and there are many such places. Therefore, when they say that the Soviet Union filled up with corpses, then about 2/3 of the losses of the Soviet Union in the Great Patriotic War, if not more, are civilians who were purpose-orientedly destroyed by the Nazis. The Red Army is blamed for not being able to protect, but that is a different theme. Do you recognize it? Peter Goff. Well, the outskirts of Leningrad all looked about the same. The Catherine Palace, there were only walls. The palace in Pavlovsk, only the walls. Pavlovsky Park was a logging site. Only a few oak trees survived there, on which the Germans hung people. So, according to ancient German beliefs, a place of execution, hanging, this is a sacred place. Therefore, the oaks were not subject to felling. It was on these oaks that they hung. Everything else was cut down for logging. And this is to the question of why we won. To all appearances, the Perm engine building plant, these are engines for aviation, for bombers of the LA-5 fighters. A boy from 12 years old works, and works well. These are the Germans in Stalingrad. Now they speculate about Stalingrad. because the mortality statistics for prisoners taken in Stalingrad are an order of magnitude higher than the statistics for the average prisoners in the Great Patriotic War. Less than 10% of those captured survived there. And this fact is now being presented in the same way that there is no fundamental difference between Hitler's death camps and the Russian attitude towards prisoners. But this does not take into account the fact that, firstly, this happened after they had been engulfed by hunger and cold. And in general, we turned out to be purely economically, logistically unprepared for the fact that after the defeat of Stalingrad, such a number of prisoners, on the order of hundreds of thousands, simply to adopt and provide them with food, adequate medical care and all that. But then Kolya from Urengoy appears and says that these are the innocent victims who died during the course of the Second World War. The question comes up, when the Germans voted for Hitler, what were they thinking? Or were they guided only by the fact that they reacted to the Führer's charisma without foreseeing the consequences of where and how this leads, or, even worse, not wanting to foresee the consequences? This is the Stalingrad tractor plant after the liberation of Stalingrad. And this is the Stalingrad tractor plant today. It seems like there was no war, there was only perestroika, and the economic reforms that followed supposedly aimed at ensuring that we all live well. And this is Zil, Moscow. There was actually no war here. And this also is Zil. There was no war. This is Baikonur. The roof of the assembly and testing building collapsed, and the flying sample of Buran and the energy rocket carrier after that were in such a state. The project was not renewed further. Well, there are two aspects, because the delivery of a kilogram of cargo into orbit on the Soyuz is somewhat cheaper than delivery on this one. But the shuttle is still a certain new quality. Since it can maneuver in orbit, it has a rather large cargo compartment, thanks to which it can perform those operations that a conventional orbital ship or space station are not able to perform. Demographic map of the world. The birth rate, natural population growth, and population decline are shown. Well, the main regions of Russia are painted in cyan or blue, and in general, this is an indicator that the country is dying out. There was no war.
And the USA in pink? Is this on account of immigrants?
No, this is natural increase. There are no immigrants here. That is, if you add immigrants here, the United States will be even redder on account of the arrival of immigrants. These are grateful descendants. And these are grateful descendants. Well, to make it clear, this is the foundation of the Alexandrian pillar on the palace square. Here is a fence with two-headed eagles. Well, it was fashionable to paint the eagles of this fence for some time. Well, now they put an end to it. And these are grateful descendants. That is, the gap between generations in terms of nraviousness, value, so-called and in essence ideals, purpose, aspiration, it really takes place. But when Russia is going through crises, then from the second half of the 19th century, a map of this type has been published in the West. Well, it says Future Map of Northern Eurasia, former Russian Federation. What is the meaning? Each region has a certain physical geographical peculiarity. And this physical geographical peculiarity generates the circumstance that transnational corporations interested in certain types of resources, they are interested in the liquidation of a single sovereign state to souvenir states subordinates to the corresponding transnational corporations are created, and the country's natural resources are exploited directly by transnational corporations who do whatever they want.
Эксплуатация природных ресурсов страны непосредственно транснациональными корпорациями, которые что хотят, то и воротят.
This is the demographic pyramid of the Russian Empire as of 1897. These surges in the size of the population are either errors in the collection of statistics, or there were some particularly fruitful years when the birth rate was palpable, higher than in other years. This is the demographic pyramid of the Russian Federation in 1939. Well, it is clear that the First World War is a demographic hole. The Civil War also left its traces. In 1926, there was a peak in the birth rate. Next comes collectivization. In it, there is also a fall. Collectivization cost us, according to various estimates, about 10 million people. Moreover, some sources refer directly to Stalin in assessing this value. They say, in one of the conversations, he told Churchill or Roosevelt about this, but the Great Depression cost the United States at least 10 million people, and in general, about this no one recalls. And this is the demographic pyramid of the Russian Federation for 2017. In general, you yourselves understand that its shape is not very good, because the correct shape of the demographic pyramid is what it was. But these are statistics of the federal level. That is, here the megalopolises and the rural areas are united together. Below are the children, above are the older age group. And if we turn to regional statistics, then this is Belarus, Staltsovsky district. This is a rural area, far from the megalopolises.
В общем-то, демографическая пирамида получается
The demographic pyramid turns out to be inverted. We have the same thing in many regions of the country. The demographic pyramid is inverted. That is, in general, there is nothing good.
Можно это или следующее? Ну, это вот федеральная пирамида.
То есть внизу это дети?
Да, внизу это вот дети, вверху это старшие возрастные группы. Вот возраст указан. А там по годам рождения. То есть, в общем-то, ничего хорошего, но войны вроде как не было.
But there actually is no war.
Последствия,
And the consequences are such that not every war, in the usual sense of the word, can generate such consequences.
такие последствия. Это плотность населения.
This is the population density linked to the map of Russia.
Взгляд со стороны Белоруссии.
This is such a three-dimensional diagram. View from the side of Belarus.
Полуостров.
Here is Crimea. Here is the Kola Peninsula, the White Sea. Here is Arkhangelsk, and then there is the city of Vladivostok, Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky, Moscow and its surroundings, Petersburg and its surroundings. Well, there is also a program to pull the entire population of the country into a dozen urban conglomerations is a very bad program.
Очень плохая программа. Карта распределения.
Map of distribution of inflation around the world. Incorrect devaluation inscription, since it was taken from the internet.
Надпись девальвации, поскольку взята из интернета.
Ludwig Erhard. After the Federal Republic of Germany arose on the ruins of the Third Reich, he was the Minister of Economy. He ended his political career as Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany. Ludwig Erhard is a man who was able to raise the Federal Republic from post-war devastation and bring it to the level of an advanced European power in terms of scientific, technical, and economic development. It is clear that he did not do it all by himself, but the Germans worked. The Germans were ready to work under his leadership because he felt the psychodynamics of German society and, on its basis, he could govern the economy. He wrote a book, Prosperity Through Competition. The book is interesting, but this is not a textbook of economic theory, which allows you to understand what needs to be done with the country's economy in order for it to develop intensively, and that an economic miracle would take place in the country. But Ludwig Erhard wrote bluntly, "Inflation is an utterly immoral thing, a theft from the body of the people. Who is to blame? Is the loss of value of money a natural phenomenon, or the work of fools? Inflation is not the result of a curse or a tragic fate, but of a frivolous and perhaps even criminal policy." None of the leadership of the domestic central bank, none of the ministers of economic development who have ever been in Russia, none of the finance ministers have come forward with any public objections to Erhard. And accordingly, for the time being, the ball is still in their court. That is, their policy is, as a minimum, frivolous, as a maximum, criminal. The article subversion was excluded from the criminal code back in 1969 in Soviet times. But in the current formulation of Article 275 of the Criminal Code, this is high treason. There is such a vague phrase, rendering a different kind of assistance to foreign states and international organizations, approximately like that. Now, if we recall this part of Article 275, then many officials must answer according to it. Well, this is the distribution of the countries of the world by the number of immigrants that each of them generate. This is a few years ago. Russia is in third place. There were such considerations that Ukraine should rise a little higher in this list, but I don't know what the data is now. This is the data before the events in Ukraine. Moreover, since we touched upon Ukraine, then at the time of the collapse of the USSR, of the former Soviet republics, only two in general could ensure full-fledged economic development. These are Ukraine and Russia, but with one caveat, with adequate state governance. There was no adequate state governance in either. Therefore, the commies are to blame for allowing the collapse of the USSR and for the fact that after the collapse of the USSR, state power ended up in the hands of people dishonest in obvious ethical terms and incompetent as professionals. Well, this is again on the theme of Ukraine. One and the same place, taken from the same angle at different times. The photo was edited. Actually, there was no war, but the psychodynamics of society, which generated the Maidan, worked. But again, the Maidan was not independent, ownerless. The Maidan was governed from the outside. Libya is the same, because if we talk about Libya during the times of Gaddafi, then it was a country with one of the highest indicators of living standards, with a high level of social protection. What blew up Libya? There was no economic reason for discontent. Clan showdown. Why is the country ruled by the Gaddafi clan and not some other clan? They wanted another clan. In the end, they have ruins. Russia, late 19th or early 20th century. There are the remnants of an inscription. To all appearances, this is the Arkhangelsk province. This settlement has ceased to be economically self-sufficient and died. And as a result, the characteristic buildings, this is this house, in which apparently a large, strong family once lived. A stone brick house next to it, dismantled into bricks and taken away somewhere. The temple is dismantled into bricks and taken away somewhere. Well, now here is just a chapel on the site of the temple. Progress of civilization, scientific technological development. This is on land. The forest, household waste, wherever you go. Well, from personal observations.
В общем, езжу я на Ниве.
In general, I drive in a Niva. In a Niva you can go where you can't go in a Classic or in an 8-9 Mercedes.
Ты не проедешь. И вот как-то раз поехали с
Once I went with my mother into nature.
доехали до
We reached some groove that was across the road. The Niva easily and simply crawled through it,
через нее легко и просто переползла. А вот
but the Classics, 8s, 9s and all others,
и все прочее
they could not
не
do it.
смогли этого сделать. И местность сразу
And the
стала
area
чистой,
immediately became clean,
потому что
because there are fewer UAZs and Nivas than everything
чем
else,
всего остального.
and accordingly they make less of a mess.
И, соответственно, гадят меньше. Вот в советские времена
In Soviet times, places that could be reached by car, and there were problems getting there by public transport, they were more or less clean.
были более-менее чистые. Как только
As soon as motorization took place, everything that could be reached by car became filthy.
на автомобиле стало загаженным.
Putin is to blame.
Путин виноват.
He split into hundreds of thousands of hypostases,
На
climbed into hundreds of thousands of cars, and purpose-orientedly drove around the country, littering it.
и целенаправленно объезжал страну, замусоривая ее. А это океан.
And this is the world's ocean. Here is the Indian Ocean,
Индийский океан. Пятно мусора от
a
Мадагаскара.
patch of rubbish from Madagascar to Australia.
Значит,
The map
на
shows the
карте
number of plastic items per square kilometer of surface.
пластиковых предметов, которые приходятся на 1 квадратный километр поверхности. Вот где красные,
Where there are red circles,
там от
there are from 700 to 3,500.
Вот
Here is the South Atlantic, here is the North Atlantic.
Северная Атлантика. То же самое в Тихом океане.
It is the same in the
В
Pacific.
Тихом океане
In the
есть
Pacific Ocean, there is actually a garbage continent, an area of more than 10 Frances.
10 Франций, плотность мусора
The density of garbage is up to 5 kilograms per square meter.
Если обратиться к фотографиям из того региона, то воды там просто не видно.
If we turn to the photographs from that region,
Место
then the water is simply not visible there.
сплошные
From the location of the shot to the horizon,
пакеты, еще
there are solid bottles, plastic bags, and other things.
недели 3 тому назад попалось в интернете сообщение.
Well, about 3 weeks ago, a report turned up on the internet. A sperm whale threw itself ashore in Australia.
40
They found 40 kilograms of plastic waste in his stomach.
40 килограммов пластикового мусора в салон
40
легкового
kilograms of plastic waste cannot be crammed into the interior of a passenger car. This is a much larger volume.
Ну а дальше есть такая.
Further, there is such a point of view.
Смотрите в интернете.
Look on the internet,
Александр
Alexander Danilov, The Civilization of Aqua Marauders.
аквамародерство.
The crux of the matter boils down to the fact that the water has certain mystical properties.
Ну, суть дела сводится к тому, что вода обладает некими мистическими.
They are mystical because we don't know the physics of water properly.
Ну, мистические они потому, что физику воды мы не знаем должным образом.
But
А
in
это
reality,
получается,
it turns out
если вы
that if you dropped a lot of chemical weapons into the Baltic after the Second World War,
уйму химического оружия, то
then the outflow of chemical toxic substances from shells and bombs,
химических отравляющих веществ,
the field effect of the corresponding chemical compounds, it spoils all water in the Baltic Sea and adjacent territories.
оно портит всю воду в акватории Балтийского моря и прилегающих территорий. Поэтому
Therefore, Europeans should not be amazed at the growth of various kinds of diseases that occur after the Second World War, since chemical weapons should not have been handled in such a way.
нельзя было так обращаться с химическим оружием. И вообще если мы разрушаем
And in general, if we destroy the hydrosphere of the planet, then, since a person is 90% water, then nothing good will happen.
хорошего не будет. Фактологии у Александра Данилова в лекциях
Factology by Alexander Danilov in Lectures and Publications.
советские юмористические издания.
And look at this.
Крокодил, сентябрь 60.
Soviet humorous editions, Krokodil, September 1969. They smoke, they are dressed approximately the same, so as not to be confused as to who is the man, who is the woman. They have signs, as on toilets.
Перец, Киев.
Peretz, Kiev.
В общем, тоже
In general, it's also possible to draw parallels that this is a creature at the level of psychic development lower than a monkey in a zoo.
развитие ниже, чем обезьяны в зоопарке.
And this is in the USA.
Соединенные Штаты. Надпись «Прекратите
Inscription: Stop making stupid people famous.
известными людьми». Потому что если есть
Because if there is a cult of famous people,
известных людей и в ранг
and
известных
idiots are raised to the rank of famous people, then they become a role model, first of all, for children.
становится образцом для подражания, прежде всего для детей. И если образцы
And if role models are idiots,
идиоты,
then nothing good shines for society in the future.
не светит. Поэтому
Therefore,
если
if we grew up and the role models were the heroes of the war, scientists,
ученые,
outstanding laborers of all professions, from workers to farmers to outstanding designers of technology,
до выдающихся
then now the role model is Dom 2.
техники, то сейчас образец для подражания дом 2. Это инстинкт.
These are instincts.
Как деградирует?
How does culture degrade?
Ну вот когда я учился,
When I studied at the Leningrad Shipbuilding Institute, in the spring, there was a student festival, Spring on Lotsmanskaya.
проходил студенческий фестиваль «Весна на Лоцманской». Значит, 4
Four faculties, 4 thematic evenings, plus the opening of the festival and the closing of the festival, so a whole week.
фестивалет на целую неделю. Снимали один из дворцов культуры.
They filmed one of the palaces of culture, and there, each faculty presented its own performance, a script written by someone, the directors were themselves, and so on and so forth.
Было чего посмотреть, было о чем подумать.
There was something to see, something to think about, something to laugh at. 2000.
2000. окончания института.
We celebrate the 20th anniversary of graduation from the institute. The meeting falls on the end of spring. Just another festival. We come to the opening night. There are fragments of performances provided by the faculties.
Факультеты. 4 конкурса красоты.
4 beauty contests.
Ножки длиннее.
Whose legs are longer and slenderer? Well, everyone has the same instincts.
Даже если учесть ЛГБТ-сообщество,
Even if we take into account the LGBT community, there is still nothing new there.
извращены.
The instincts are primitive, even if they are perverted. This is the result of purpose-oriented dumbing down of several generations,
Поколений,
starting after Stalinist times.
в послесталинские времена процесс оболвания
In the post-Stalinist era, the process of dumbing down was started by the school, television,
не торопились.
but it went slowly. And during and after perestroika, the process of dumbing down was intensified.
интенсифицировался. И, может быть, вы
Maybe you know
знаете,
there is such a professor, Katasonov, at MGIMO.
но он в одном из своих выступлений
In one of his speeches, he gave an example when his friend asked the students a question:
вопросы вот
What is the most valuable resource in a market economy?
в рыночной экономике. Все перечисляли, что не
Everyone listed whatever they listed.
преподаватели
The
ответили.
teacher replied, A fool.
И производство дураков поставлено
And the production of fools is put on a conveyor belt.
школа,
The school, the mass media are engaged precisely in this.
этим. Ну и вот лозунг в Соединенных Штатах.
Well, the slogan in the United States: Stop making stupid people famous.
Может, еще самый главный ресурс?
Дурак.
Нет, вот
This here is a set for boys to play with.
Ну, это вот набор, чтобы мальчики играли.
Play set for boys.
Игровой набор.
Grow up to be gay. That is, the task is like this.
Чтобы стать геем. То есть задача вот такая.
Gender-neutral toilet.
Нейтральный туалет. Это туалетная комната.
This washroom can be used by any persona, regardless of their gender identity or the impression they make.
Идентичности или впечатления, которое она производит. Поговаривают о том,
There is talk of making a legislative provision according to which a child at the age of 6 may require a sex reassignment operation.
проведение операций по смене пола.
No, not in Russia,
В России пока
so far in the European Union.
но
But the claims of the European Union against Russia on the theme of a specific attitude towards the LGBT community, juvenile justice and everything else that exists in Europe,
в Европе, они
they will
будут
only grow.
нарастать. О причинах будем говорить.
We will talk about the reasons further on.
Ну, в общем, общество потребления это все-таки
In general, a consumer society is after all really slavery,
только
only the toys are more enticing.
привлекательные. Три вида зависимости. Гаджеты, алкоголь,
3 types of addiction:
курево.
gadgets, alcohol, smoking.
Четвертая зависимость.
In the original, there was also a 4th addiction,
Тоже рука,
also a hand, a chain, in the hand, a penis, that is, a generalization of all sexual perversions,
половых извращений. Цивилизация, в которой
a civilization in which the cult of hedonism is the norm,
смысл
the meaning of life is to get pleasure.
удовольствий.
Well, in the end it leads to what was already in one of the early stories, if I'm not mistaken,
Из ранних
by the
рассказов
Strugatsky brothers,
братьев Стругацких.
the implantation of electrodes in the center of pleasure, and a person needs nothing other than that.
Этого. Ну, в общем, действительно,
In
так
general, indeed, this is how beer alcoholism appeared,
появился пивной алкоголизм и
and what is called beer castration,
пивная кастрация.
when boys aged 10 years and older start drinking beer. The reproductive organs and hormonal background are not formed according to the male type.
Активные
They turn out to be
и
weakened,
гормональный фон не формируются по мужскому типу, оказываются
and then sharply matured on beer children turn out to be inconsistent as the continuers of the family.
оказываются несостоятельны как продолжатели рода.
Well, this, unfortunate or not unfortunate, but this is natural.
Или не к сожалению, но это закономерно. Примерно треть населения
Approximately 1/3 of the population carries genetic predisposition to the fact that if alcohol enters the diet systematically, then a biochemical dependence on alcohol arises, and further the degradation of the organism.
организма. А это смотрите,
And look at this too,
осуществляется
how the impact on the psyche of people is carried out. Gost 1972,
2 года.
alcohol belongs to strong narcotics.
Относится к
That is, a warning in a direct, open form.
предостережение в прямой открытой форме. ГОСТ 80
Gost 1982 continues,
продолжается. Относится к сильно действующим.
belongs to strong narcotics.
ГОСТ
Gost 1993 is already laughs, a colorless liquid with a characteristic odor and nothing else.
ничего больше. Но это позволяет
Well, this allows you to remove drug trafficking from under state narco control
наркоконтроля или что там,
and not raise the theme of sobriety.
тему о трезвости.
Moreover, there is a decision of some courts on the theme that Russian means sober, this is extremism. There was Fyodor Grigorievich Uglov, a surgeon, a cardiologist who never drank. He wrote several books on this theme. One of them is called From the Captivity of Illusions. With medical scrupulousness, he professionally describes and explains why there are no life-giving doses of alcohol. There are only doses that destroy the organism. Red blood cells. In general, when the level of alcohol in the blood exceeds a certain critical value, alcohol washes away the fatty membrane from erythrocytes. They lose a negative electrostatic charge and begin to stick together. Well, further, there is such a circumstance that we in our brain have capillaries, and into these capillaries, when the erythrocyte squeezes, it expands them. That is, it is simultaneously a massage of the capillaries from the inside, some kind of cleaning and supplying of the brain with oxygen. It is clear that when something like this is formed, it cannot squeeze in there. The neuron lives without oxygen for 5 minutes. Accordingly, after drinking, entire neural fields are dead, and in the following days, the organism works to remove from the body decay products, not only alcohol, but perished cells. Well, since after all the brains and the process of intellectual activity are connected, then we lose our intellectual power every time such a thing as this here happens. How do we lose it? Differently. This is the effect of alcohol on the brain. The effect of alcohol on the heart. Well, this is a caricature, but nonetheless, if Russia became sober, the West would react something like this. Because in this case, the world domination of the West is impossible. Narcotics, one of the types, crocodile, entails the destruction of the vascular system and tissue necrosis. In general, in the future, the young lady will be left without arms and possibly without legs. A smoke break at the hospital. For many of today's ladies, the following position is characteristic. I am a good mother. As soon as I found out that I was pregnant, I immediately quit drinking and smoking. Counter question: at what stage of pregnancy did you find out? During the first 2 weeks of pregnancy, a neural tube forms from which the entire nervous system then arises. According to the data of medical statistics of St. Petersburg, about 90% of children at the age of 1 year have some kind of problems which medicine calls by the term encephalopathy. That is, a violation in the development of the brain. At a minimum, in the future, this is an attention deficit. That is, problems with learning at school, if not more serious problems. Problems with schooling ultimately lead to the fact that children, without receiving proper education, cannot master many professions, and in severe cases they go to criminality. Because they want to spend a lot, but it's impossible to make money, and studying is boring and too much. And then quickly, hey, stop, come from around the corner, take the money. And in general, this over here, this is the production of criminality in the future. According to British statistics, more than half of the bullies are born of mothers who smoke. And this is not a parenting problem. The problem of upbringing is secondary to the fact that they are biologically defective. Well, this is also possible. What will happen next? This is an open question. History goes on, nothing changes. Fursenko, United Russia, higher mathematics kills creativity. In general, this is its own kind of intelligence test, because when I was teaching sociology at the Agrarian University, a couple of times situations arose where a student comes and says, "Give me a mark without testing," or "be lenient." The point is this: I'm not very good in sociology, but nevertheless I'm pretty good at mathematics. Fine. We won't ask questions about why you didn't go to the mechanical mathematical course, but if you're pretty good at maths, here you are. Where is the mistake? Not one single student, with 2 attempts, showed where the error was. And from where did this 2 suddenly become equal to 1? Moreover, although the most impudent student, who had asked for a mark without testing in the humanitarian discipline, was asked to solve this puzzle, nonetheless it was always in the presence of a group, and the group watched with interest what would happen. Because you cannot see where the divisibility of 0 is. Division by 0 is prohibited. The penultimate line is division by 0. Well, this is how history is edited. The inscription of the USSR disappeared from Gagarin's helmet. And these are posters of the 20s and 30s. On behalf of the children, the requirements are bans on smoking. And, along with this, in almost all films of the 30s and 40s, the good guys smoke. This has come true. If you look at the waiting room of a train station, in some cases in a cafe, it would seem like a group of friends has gathered, there is something to talk about. But everyone is sitting on their gadgets until a waiter appears with something to chew on. Remember, there was such a Breivik. The media said that he single-handedly killed several dozen people. First in Oslo, and then on the island of Utoya. This is the plan of Utoya Island and Breivik's route around the island with chronology. Well, if you turn on your imagination and imagine yourself in Breivik's place, then a simple question. From 7 past 5 p.m. to 27 past 6 p.m., is it possible on such a terrain to kill several dozen people alone?
Несколько десятков человек вот на такой местности. Ну, в общем, суть в чем?
Well, in general, the essence is this.
Чем был вооружен Брейвик?
With what was Breivik armed? If he walks like this, then the aiming range will not be sufficient to hit a person from a distance of hundreds of meters. In addition, the forest and bushes come right up to the shore. And if he walks along the coast in this forest and bush, he does not see anything. The height of the Utoya coast is not a gentle slope, a sandy beach, but a rather steep cliff, and a rocky surface goes into the water. If a person is hiding on a rocky surface of the water's edge, from a person walking along the shore, the hiding person is not visible. If a person is hiding from the water along the water's edge, somewhere in this bush, he is not visible either. That is, if we talk about what happened on Utoya, then yes, Breivik appeared, then he opened fire at the place where there was a mass of people, and he killed some. Everyone rushed every which way, but there was nowhere to run. They ran to the water's edge and came under fire from snipers or machine gunners, who shot them from boats. But this is not mentioned anywhere. Breivik alone did all that. And Breivik, sitting in prison, is receiving an education from the University of Oslo in the speciality of politology. That is, Breivik, as a political project, has not been closed, and the mass media periodically report that Breivik won another trial on the theme that his human rights are violated in prison and that he is given cold coffee in the morning. Well, this is one of the teachers at the Higher School of Economics, Leonid Markovich Kochberg, one of the creators of the Program for Economic Development of Russia, Strategy 2020. He owns the phrase, 71% of the population is a burden for Strategy 2020. That is, this is a genocide policy that is being developed not somewhere in the CIA and the National Security Council, but in the Higher School of Economics, which in general, if not a state enterprise, then it receives a lot of government grants, and no one has any claims against it. One of the northern villages. Now, if you look at such a house, then had it been new in the modern real estate catalogue, it would have been characterized as a two-story cottage with an area of such and such, built from selected logs. Its cost would be at the level of about 10 million rubles and more. But if you come to the Arkhangelsk region, visit the architectural reserve, Malye Karyeli, then passing by such a house, you will find a sign, manor of a middle peasant, brought from village such and such, the middle of the 19th century.
Привезенные из деревни такой-то середины 19 века. То есть это
That is, this is not at all an elite cottage at the time of construction. This is the estate of a middle peasant. Accordingly, those who were not middle peasants and richer, they built themselves something bigger. You can see what they built in Kizhi. There is also a poor man's house in Kizhi. If we exclude the outbuildings, which in the north were under the same roof with the housing, and the houses in general had two entrances to the outbuildings, a summer entrance at the ground level and a winter entrance. There was an inclined ramp, and the gates were on the second floor. That is, our predecessors did not consider it necessary to clear away tons of snow, but simply drove through the snow and climbed where it was necessary, like this. Then, if outbuildings are excluded from the house of a poor peasant, then the area of living quarters will be 49 square meters. And this is more than the ultimate dream of many, a 4-room Khrushchevka apartment with a living area of 44 square meters. There actually was no war in the last 20 years either. Well, if you look at life soberly, then everything in life flows in accordance with objective laws. Objective laws can be attributed to one of 6 groups. Pan-biospheric objective laws regulate the interaction of the biosphere with the planet and the cosmos, regulate the formation of biocenoses and the interaction of biological species with each other within the boundaries of biocenoses. But each biological species has a certain specifics. And there are species-specific objective laws that distinguish the biological species Homo sapiens from all others. The next group of objective laws, it does not exist from the point of view of atheists. Because from the point of view of atheists, man is the sole carrier of reason, at least on the planet, if not in the entire observable cosmos. But even in the days of Marxism-Leninism, Nikolai Mikhailovich Amosov wrote that the laws to which the intellect is subordinated are the same for human intellect, for the collective intellect of society, for artificial intellect, and for all other types of intellect. That is, it remained to conclude that intellect is a pan-natural phenomenon, and, accordingly, human intellect is a particular case. Noospheric-religious objective laws regulate the interrelationship between the possessors of reason, the carriers of intellect. They go beyond the boundaries of society, and factually these objective laws enter society from the outside, from the hierarchically higher levels of the organization of the universe. And they act. Well, how do they act? If we turn to history, we can see such an objective law, that those who were wrong, for some reason, at critical moments in the development of the situation, for some reason they were unlucky. During the Second World War, for the Americans, the Battle of Midway, this is their Stalingrad, in the war at sea in the battle with Japan. The Japanese were truly unlucky at the Battle of Midway. How unlucky? They had a separation of functions.
Самолеты с авианосцев наносят удары,
Aircraft from aircraft carriers strike at enemy ships and coastal targets,
которые
and aircraft based on cruisers and aircraft carriers are reconnaissance seaplanes, and they are engaged in reconnaissance.
И вот когда они подошли к Медуэне,
And so, when they approached Midway, they lifted the reconnaissance seaplanes into the air, and all flew but one.
с ним что-то случилось.
Something happened to it. It took off with a 45-minute delay.
И за эти вот 40
And during these 45 minutes, plus the time of his flight to where he was supposed to go, during this time, the Japanese managed to make critical mistakes.
совершить критические ошибки.
Because when all the other seaplanes left for their areas,
Вышли в свои
none of them found traces of the American fleet, about which they reported.
российского флота. О чем и доложили. И японцы стали готовить
And the Japanese began to prepare carrier-based aircraft of aircraft carriers to attack coastal targets.
самолеты фугасные и бетонобойные бомбы.
They hung high explosive and concrete piercing bombs on the planes.
Запоздавший
At this
гидросамолет
time,
в свой район.
this last belated seaplane went to its area and found the American fleet.
Вместо того,
Instead of immediately striking at the American fleet, even if not with armor-piercing bombs and torpedoes, but with high explosive and concrete-piercing bombs,
бомбами и бетонобойными бомбами,
the Japanese began to re-equip their aircraft.
самолетов
They removed from them mines and bombs,
фугасники и бетонобойки вешали на
hung
самолет
torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs on the aircraft, and when the process of rearming the aircraft was coming to an end,
вооружение с
the Americans attacked the Japanese aircraft carriers.
нанесли удар по
They naturally reduced them to embers.
Они, естественно, превратились в головешки. Вот пример того,
So, this is an example of how unlucky the Japanese were.
но это проявление
But this is a manifestation of these noospheric-religious objective laws that regulate the interrelationship of possessors of reason.
регулирует взаимоотношения обладателей разума. То есть ноосфера
That is, the noosphere is not an invention of Vernadsky, who was not mistaken in anything, except for the mistake of having generated the teaching of the noosphere.
это реальный
This is a real factor with which we interact both collectively and individually.
индивидуально. У немцев то же самое.
With the Germans, it's the same.
Во-первых,
Well, firstly, the Kherson-Shevchenkovsky operation, when the Germans tried to break out of the encirclement. The reaction of British observers: you have nothing to do with this victory. It's just that where the Germans tried to break through, there was accidentally a tank group being sent from one place to another, and it rode through the German lines. But this was not planned either by our staff on the ground or by the general staff. It was brought from above. You break through here, and the Russians are moving a tank column here too, and there was a scrap. There was one more scrap at sea. This was the death of the German battleship Scharnhorst during the Second World War. To make it clear what happened, in the conditions of the polar night during a combat contact, a shell from an English battleship demolished a radio locating antenna on Scharnhorst. You see, this is not a direct hit. The probability of hitting a ship with a single projectile in those days was less than 2%. Into a ship about 200 meters in length, and the size of the antenna against the background of the ship was about 3 meters. To hit an object measuring 3 meters from 20 kilometers away with a heavy projectile is a miracle. But the miracle happened, and it worked against the
То
Germans.
есть ноосферно-религиозные закономерности
That is,
действуют,
the noospheric-religious subjective laws, they act,
нравственно-этический
they carry a
характер,
novice ethical character,
и
and
история
history shows that
показывает,
at turning
что в
points,
поворотные
the one who is
моменты
wrong becomes their victim.
тот, кто не прав, становится их жертвой. Дальше есть социокультурные.
Further, there are socio-cultural objective laws.
Почему? Культура
Culture is
вариативна.
variative.
Мы можем породить культуру, которая
We can generate a culture that will kill societies over the course of several generations.
мы можем породить
We can generate a culture that will ensure intrasocial harmony and ensure the harmony of civilization and the biosphere.
гармонию цивилизации и биосферы. Соответственно, социокультурные.
Accordingly, it is necessary to know the socio-cultural objective laws.
Ну, далее.
If the artificial habitat disappears,
Питание искусственное,
if we are deprived of production, both food and consumer goods, then the lifetime of the majority of us in the natural environment is unlikely to be more than 2 weeks.
большинства из нас в естественной среде вряд ли будет более 2 недель. Причем в условиях
Moreover,
севера
in the conditions of the north and the conditions of the tropics, it can be even less than a day, because in the cold without a shirt, most will crumble within the hour.
большинство загнется в течение часа.
In the tropics, there are a lot of all kinds of animals,
Есть много
the bite of which is fatal for us,
укус который для нас смертелен. А если
and if you yourself want to eat, you can pick some nasty thing, and it will give your organism something that will reliably and guaranteedly destroy it.
организму то, что надежно и гарантированно его уничтожит. Поэтому
Therefore, the
производство
production of both food and consumer goods
предметов
and an artificial habitat at the current level of development of culture and its quality for us is a necessity.
культуры и ее качества для нас необходимость. Есть экономические закономерности.
There are also economic objective laws that can ensure prosperity if we observe them, and genocide if we don't know them and someone violates them in relation to us.
Кто-то их нарушает в отношении нас.
Well, besides this, there are also governorial objective laws that are expressed in all processes of governance.
Выражаются во всех процессах управления.
If your child rides a tricycle and you observe where and how he goes, if several states are undertaking some kind of joint project, maybe on the principles of state-private partnership, then in both one and the other, governorial objective laws are the same, although they are expressed in different processes.
Принципах государственно-частного партнерства, то и там управленческие закономерности одни и те же, хотя они выражаются в разных процессах.
And now, if you know all this here, then in general civilization can live well. If you do not know this, then all sorts of troubles are inevitable.
Всякие неприятности неизбежны. Если этим
If you possess and use this in the quality of an instrument of aggression, then you can conquer a lot of things, and it will not be seen.
то можно много чего завоевать. И это будет незаметно.
And those identical pictures of what the Stalingrad tractor looked like after the war,
Сталинградский тракт.
and what zeal looks like in peacetime,
И как выглядит
this is precisely on the theme of the fact that in the USSR,
как раз
they did not possess this,
то в
and some people used this in relation to the USSR.
А кое-кто пользовался в отношении СССР именно этим.
Further, a question about destiny. The destiny of a person is a multivariate scenario of his life.
Вариантный сценарий
Something in him is predetermined univocally,
что-то в нем
something is variative.
однозначно, что-то вариативно.
Therefore, in the overwhelming majority of cases, having not very good starting conditions, you can realize a very good destiny.
Реализовать очень
And having good starting conditions, you can be right here.
хорошие стартовые условия, можно оказаться вот тут. Тут вот обратите внимание, здоровые малыши
Here, pay
не
attention.
борются.
A healthy baby is smiling, and here is a baby with an oxygen mask. That is, there are some problems, and they are rather difficult. But nonetheless, the prospects are not univocal and are largely determined by the behavior of the parents, and then the behavior of the person himself. If you hear the word statistics, what images do you get? But really, if you hear the word statistics, then you should get this picture. Not only should it appear before your inner gaze, you should understand what is depicted on it and how it is connected. The Second Congress of Mathematics Teachers of Grammar Schools and Real Schools in 1913 considered it necessary to introduce into the standard of secondary education in the Russian Empire the foundations of probability theory and mathematical statistics. Until now, this has not been done. If students who have already passed the exam or test in probability theory and mathematical statistics are asked to practically construct statistics on the distribution of a group, for example, in terms of height, then this task turns out to be impossible, because they are not able to connect this abstractionism with life. But if society is a multitude of people, the economy is a multitude of enterprises, then there are natural questions about what set of statistics describes society, economy, national economy. If these statistics somehow change, then is it good or bad? If it is bad, then what needs to be done in order for the statistics to change for the better? Well, if, let's say, with the Duma, or with the entire government apparatus, that is, with all the employees of the ministries, an exam on the theme of what mathematical statistics and probability theory are, and how they are correlated with life, I think the results will be very sad. Even those who went through this at the higher educational institutions are unlikely to be able to answer these questions. Nevertheless, one must understand this and comprehend what is hidden behind the word statistics. That is why we will move from the pictures to that which is hidden. This is a certain plurality of something. Each element of the plurality is described by a certain set of characteristics. We take one of the characteristics. This is the axis where the characteristic is measured, where it grows numerically. And on this axis, we have some ranges.
До этого момента все понятно.
Is everything clear up to this point?
Теперь мы начинаем
Now we begin to
анализировать
analyze this
это
plurality
множество и все его элементы, которые
and all its
попадают в
elements
первый
that fall into the
диапазон,
first range we depict as follows.
изображаем так.
That is, there is a quantity.
Ну, понятно, что тут стало несколько
Well, it's
поменьше.
clear that here the elements are slightly fewer.
Здесь тоже какое-то количество.
Here too a certain quantity of elements. Here is also some quantity of elements.
элементов.
There is a quantity of elements here.
Количество элементов. Ну и в конце концов,
After all, we can have a certain quantity of elements here too.
у нас тут тоже может быть какое-то количество элементов. Понятно? Ну и в итоге
Well, in the end, 100% of the elements of the plurality fell into some ranges.
какие-то
Some ranges may be empty, some ranges may be full.
могут быть полными. Ну, может сложиться и так.
But a situation may arise that all 100% fell into a certain range. Anything can happen in life.
Но тем не менее, вот 100%
But nevertheless, 100% of all statistics of this entire plurality, it is somehow distributed among them.
если мы вот эту
Now,
процедуру
if we have
выполним,
performed
то
this
вот эта
procedure,
вот ступенчатая
then this is a stepped line.
линия
It forms what is called the distribution density of a random variable.
образует то, что называется плотность распределения случайной величины. Ну, а нас, допустим, интересует.
Well, we, for example, are interested in the following. What is the probability that a random variable, this here parameter, does not exceed a certain value? And what should be done then?
Тогда у нас появляется еще одна.
Then we have one more curve.
Ну, диапазоны тут те же самые.
But the ranges here are the same. I will not go into millimeters. I will just depict this and that's it.
Но мы можем проделывать вот такую.
But we can do this operation.
Если вот у нас есть вот этот вот диапазон,
And if we have this range here,
и нас интересует, сколько
and we are interested in how many percent of this here plurality turns out to be to the left of the border from this range,
слева от границы от этого диапазона, то мы просто все
then we simply pile everything up here.
все столбики какие
We
слева,
pile up all the columns on the left on this column,
получаем вот
and we get something like this.
это дает нам
This gives us a fraction
долю статистики,
of the statistics that do not exceed this here value.
то есть 100% где-то тут,
That is, 100% is somewhere here, and this is the fraction that is less than or equal to this one.
которая меньше или равна вот этому. Граница
The upper limit of the range.
вот эта доля
This
называется
fraction is called probability,
и она
and it is
равна
equal to
тому,
the
что
fact that the
случайная
random variable
величина не превысит
will not exceed the value that we have chosen in the quality of interesting for us and have summed up all the columns that were before it on the left.
и просуммировали все столбики, которые были до него слева. Но мы занимались этим делом,
But in this case, we were engaged in this business where there is a plurality.
пересчитателями,
There you can count the elements, their finite number.
число. Ну, а аппарат теории вероятности
Well, the apparatus of probability theory and mathematical statistics It connects the very same things, also in the case of uncountable pluralities and infinite pluralities. This is an analog of the distribution density of a random variable, and this is the distribution of the random variable itself. And if we set ourselves in the fact that we are interested in the question, what is the probability that this random variable will not exceed this value, then everything is simple. We go from the horizontal axis, here it is duplicated from above, to the distribution graph, and along we go to the axis. Accordingly, here we have the probability that the random variable does not exceed. It goes down there, and what it exceeds, it goes up. In general, there is nothing complicated, but when you hear the word statistics, you should get images of these graphs here. If something happened in life, it means that the distribution has changed. If it has changed, what can be? The minimum value can shift horizontally to the right or the left. The maximum value can also shift to the right or left. Accordingly, this graph will take some other form. And if this is some kind of social statistics, you must decide whether this is good or bad. If it is good, then good. If it is bad, then something must be done in order for it to become good. And if it's good, how should it be? And good means that the minimum should lie in a certain set by U range. The maximum should also lie in a set by U range, and then this non-decreasing curve, it will not go anywhere from this range. Yes, it can also change somehow there, but look what happens. Let's say that this is the income of the population. The average income is growing. Accordingly, this is the point where 50% get more and 50% get less. It creeps away somewhere here. But along with this, the points of maximum and minimum creep away. And factually, a situation may arise that the average income is growing, but along with this, the minimum is creeping somewhere to the left. And accordingly, in your society, against the background of the growth in average income, the number of poor is growing. Is it good or bad? For someone, it is bad, while others believe that 70% of the country's population is a burden for the 2020 program, and accordingly, this is good. And a great deal of people who are not able to understand the word statistics, they are led by what they are told. The average income is growing. Some of them really say that they receive not the average salary and not the average income, but their own specific salary, and that has dropped. But again they object, well, the average income is growing, if you don't like it, work more, look for another job, the average income is growing. But discussing the life of society at the level of statistics is not accepted by our political culture. Moreover, both in the state apparatus and in society. Now about the origin of this very presentation. In Leningrad, there was the Kosygin Institute of Light Industry, the so-called RAGS. Now, in St. Petersburg, it is the University of Light Industry, still named after Kosygin. But the former technical school became a lyceum at the university. And so the Lyceum produces bachelors in advertising and business, design specialities. Well, and in general, one of the problems of higher education is the prevention of narcomania and other deviant behavior among students. Therefore, there is an inter-higher educational institution center which analyzes these problematics in the higher educational institutions of St. Petersburg. And the center decided to conduct classes with the students of this college lyceum at the rags. And it turned out that students, if to correlate with Soviet times, 9th grade students, consider the main problems of Russia to be the suppression of sexual minorities. Well, when this came up, everyone was surprised. And to sober up the students, they were offered this presentation. It did not arouse interest. Moreover, those who believed that the main problem of Russia is the incorrect policy towards the LGBT communities, which are also creative, so very dobrous, so very useful, they demonstratively got up and left. That is, the situation is very badly neglected. This concludes the presentation. What questions are there?
In the presentation, hands were shown, and there was a pack of cigarettes in one of the hands. Also, the presentation showed the concretics of alcohol in accordance with GOST. What is the point of the scary images of lungs of smokers on the pack of cigarettes? What does this mean?
Да, сейчас вот. Ну, в общем, это имитация.
This is an imitation of the fight against smoking, because when a person buys a pack of cigarettes, and this is depicted there, then this nightmare in the pictures should induce him to think that smoking is harmful. But in reality, we are dealing with a biochemical dependence that acts in different ways. And in general, all smokers know that smoking is harmful, but few can overcome this biochemical dependence. This is a different theme, but this is an imitation of the fight against smoking. If it was written on the pack of cigarettes that if you smoke, you ruin the health of your children and grandchildren, I think it would be somewhat more effective. But still, if a biochemical addiction has arisen, it is a rare person without outside help who is able to get rid of it. Therefore, those who smoke, for the most part, they will die as smokers. And as for the eradication of this from society, first and foremost, it is necessary to prevent children, moreover in kindergarten age, and not in adolescence, when children, imitating adults, begin to partake in alcohol, smoking, narcotics, a dissolute lifestyle. This is cool. If it's cool, then I'm also cool. I have to try. Further, there are broken lives.
Whose hand is this?
Ну, просто кто-то вот так.
Ну, наверное, должна быть рука родителей тогда, да?
Ну, в общем-то, рука в данном случае...
In general, this is the hand of the victims of these addictions. Someone is chained to a gadget, someone is chained to a flask.
Фляжка вот этого типа,
By the way,
кстати, изобретение
the flask of
Александра
this type is the invention of
III.
Alexander III, if one believes this
Они
version.
там с начальником охраны иногда любили
He and the
выпить,
chief of security liked to
поскольку
drink.
императрица ругала,
Since the empress
была
scolded him,
изобретена вот
such a
такая
form of
форма
flask was
фляжки,
invented,
которая
which was stuck into the
втыкалась в
bootleg.
днище сапога.
You do not consider the upcoming digitalization to be just a way of governing people with the objective of eliminating all bad habits.
Потому что даже если мы
Digitalization is not a hindrance to them,
то
because
кто-то будет
even if we are
нарушать
building a
и
big data
платить
system,
штрафы, кто-то не будет
then someone will violate and
нарушать.
pay
Всё равно
fines, someone will not.
цифровизация ведет к
But all the
образованию.
same, after all,
Ну, первое
digitalization leads to dumbing down.
электронные калькуляторы.
First manifestations. Electronic calculators appeared.
Эпизоды.
Well, here are two funny
На одной
episodes.
из кафедр
At one of the
преподаватель
departments, the
что-то
teacher was
считал.
counting something.
И когда он выполнил
And when he performed a large
большой
set of
расчёт,
calculations,
кто-то
someone noticed
заметил,
that
что в
8
его расчёте
was not found anywhere in his calculations.
8. Восьмерка. Обратились к его
They turned to his
калькулятору.
calculator.
Оказалось,
It
что
turned out that the 3 and the 8 on the display were displayed the
отражаются
same,
одинаково.
because the two segments that formed an 8,
которые вот
how?
образовывали восьмерку, как? Вот
Here is the 8. These two segments are off, a 3.
два вот этих сегмента не горят, тройка. Вот два этих сегмента у него никогда не горели.
These two segments never lit up for him.
Выполнил
He
огромный
performed a huge set of calculations
расчетов
and
и
did not notice
заметил
it.
этого. Другой пример. Сразу как появились калькуляторы, то в ходе
Another
расчетов
example.
все стали
Right away, when
переходить
calculators
на
appeared,
стол, на
in the course of
калькулятор.
calculations,
Хотя
everything immediately began to be multiplied
нажимание кнопок
by
можно
10,
было
by 100
избежать и
on the
просто
calculator.
написать 0 или
Although
2
pressing the
нуля
buttons, it was possible to avoid, and to simply add 0 or 2 zeros to the corresponding number which was already in the notebook or on the sheet. That is, digitalization immediately leads to dumbing down, because everything that concerns the current work with artificial intelligence, in fact, is prosthetics of one's own intellect with a non-desire to use it. What is hidden under our cranial vault is orders of magnitude superior to the supercomputers of our days. And if we talk about the collective intellect of humanity, then there are generally boundless possibilities that we do not use.
Now an ecological movement is being put forward, as if taking care of our planet is a kind of a new religion, that every person is accused of environmental pollution, and he must die as soon as possible, so as not to pollute anything, not exhale carbon dioxide, not throw out anything, give birth to fewer children. In general, such an ideology is being put forward. Does this mean that all modern higher-ups technocrats put all this on ordinary people?
They do put it. They have to blame themselves for this. But on the other hand, there is also a certain share of guilt of ordinary people, because when a person says, "I am a small person, nothing depends on me," a counter-question is also possible. Why are you so small? And why does nothing depend on you? What have you done so that at least something depends on you? And many people have nothing to answer to this question, although indeed, if all are small, maybe they saw the caricature in which there is a huge crowd and above it the slogan, "What can I alone do?" Now, if people are disunited, then indeed many things cannot be solved alone, and the state power is not competent, and in some cases does not have political will. Because look, 1992, the UN Conference in Rio de Janeiro on Sustainable Development. 2015, UN General Assembly on the same themes. The UN General Assembly resolution is on the internet. It sets the task of overcoming poverty, illiteracy, the ecological crisis, and much more. But a very simple question arises. The UN Conference on Sustainable Development in 1992 in Rio de Janeiro adopted a certain resolution. It correctly sets the objectives, names the tasks that need to be solved. In all more or less developed countries, there are many universities, scientific research organizations, and since 1992, more than a quarter of a century has passed, during which this whole pack of scientists could have worked out scientific methodological support of state governance and governance in the economy, which would allow one to solve these tasks. Had they developed it, then we come to any higher educational institution and see this scientific methodological support in the curriculum, at least in such areas of training specialists as state and municipal governance, governance in the economy, jurisprudence. And what do we see there? And there we see blah 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 about nothing. Therefore, the questions are really very serious, and if they are not resolved by the state power and the officialdom of science and the system of education, and they need to be solved, then those people who understand that there are problems, that they need to be solved, and there is no one else to solve them, they will have to solve them on the principles of self-organization. So far, it is like this.